Good morning and welcome to the Point. This morning we are going to be talking about all those things you would expect. We'll talk about the budget, we will talk about the roads, we'll talk about all of that. But first we're going to talk about something else that actually is more maybe pressing at this very moment than all of those things, because you still got a little bit of time. We welcome Senator Roger Victory in, and while I know people are anxious to get the budget done, I want to start by talking about something you're uniquely qualified to talk about, because you've been in agriculture all your life, and because this year farmers have been put way behind and in some cases aren't going to be able to plant their crops at all. So let me start with what the state has already done. You in the legislature passed an appropriation for $15 million that will be used as the money to free up loans, low interest loans for farmers and suppliers who haven't been able to get to their crops yet or have losses from those. That may free up something like $300 million, I think.
Yep.
So that's what the state has already done. The governor signed that a couple of weeks ago, and that's already in the process. But as a farmer yourself in Ottawa County, tell me what farmers have been up against this year and the kind of impact that it could have, because this is a big business for Michigan.
That it is. It's, you know, in Michigan, agriculture is one of the top industries. We have tourism, manufacturing, and agricultural. Those are the three industries we have. And let me just start out, very stressful. That we haven't seen anything quite like this in decades. And I've even talked to those who are in their 80s that say, you know, we've seen droughts, but we had never seen a spring that had the continual rain. And what really impacted this year, you see some of the best of the farmland, you know, that has a little bit more of that heavier clay material that usually produces that 200 plus bushel corn, never got planted. And that's something I have never seen before. As my journey is up and back to Lansing at times too, and usually you see that lush corn growing along Interstate 96. It's just not there. So, and this is going to have an impact. It's going to have impact to markets. And what's unique about Michigan, we not only produce it here, but we do the processing. And one of the part of the processing is that corn, we feed it to our livestock industry. And in western Michigan, we have a strong hog industry, turkey industry, and dairy industry. Let alone the dairy industry has been kind of in a depression state, been a mass liquidation. So now with the milk prices somewhat going up, now their input cost will be 30% higher. So it's a tough journey. Hog industry has been hurt by the tariffs. Now they've seen the trade negotiations moving forward, so let's see a little positive attitude there. But yet now again, being affected with these higher input costs. So it's going to be, it's stressful during the planting time, but it's going to be stressful through the whole year as we see these costs increase.
One of the things that you've touched on, and I think it's important to kind of highlight a little bit, is the expanded nature. If you are a farmer and you don't get your crop in, then you know that's going to be a loss for you. And we should point out that some of those loans provided for by that $15 million is kind of backfill. They still got to pay the loans back, but it's at least
not a grant. These are loans.
And it's a low interest loan, so that is of some help. But so you know that's going to be a cost. But then probably you didn't buy your supplies because you weren't going to be able to plant. So now the supplier is out, and perhaps you didn't need the extra equipment, so the equipment supplier is out. So this isn't just about farmers, it has a big ripple effect.
It is a multiplier effect. It's going to be a huge multiplier effect in this billion-dollar economy in the ag industry in Michigan and throughout the whole Midwest. But you know, you encapsulate it very well. It's not just the agricultural community, and I know some of the suppliers, agricultural agronomists, suppliers are too. They ordered those seeds, and it was certain maturity seed. Then they had to ship that seed back, get a different variety of seed, ship that seed back, get another, and ultimately, then probably didn't utilize that seed. And there's a lot of well-laid plans that were designed back in, let's say, January and February that never got implemented. And they actually went to Plan D, I would say, at that point in time.
And it's not just about not planting, and there's plenty of that, as you point out, but there's a lot of crops that have been planted much later than would have normally been planned, which almost necessarily means yields are going to be lower.
You are exactly right. I mentioned earlier that some of this prime farmland that they always see producing that 200 plus bushel acre corn. Well, that usually is planted early on, and it has a maturity date of corn that will produce those type of yields. Now, if the grower or the farmer had resort to a shorter date planting variety corn, that yield potential is there. It might be only 150 or 120 or 100 bushel per acre. So you're sacrificing that yield by this the different variety you had to plant for the early maturity. So yeah, it's, even though you might see that green crop growing, the potential is not going to be there.
And I think one of the folks in the ag department talked about 40 million bushels off for the state of Michigan. I mean, this is a significant event, even though other places in the Midwest probably got hit harder, but we're certainly feeling it here.
Yeah, and then there's some, the USDA is coming out with their numbers, and I don't know what fields they're looking at, but must be the best of the best, because their projection is higher than what I feel what is going to come on the bottom line there. So yeah, we can see what the feds are saying, and versus I think the reality. The proof will be in the pudding a little bit later on.
Well, you obviously serve in a number of capacities on the agriculture, appropriations, agriculture. Have you been in touch with USDA? I know the governor's office has been in touch, trying to get them to clarify or even relax some of the rules for some of the help that they might be able to provide. Is that something?
Right, not directly, but I appreciate the executive office moving forward on that and working with the director of MDAR on the component. But yeah, making sure that in a timely fashion too, because you can't go have this set up to a committee and have a hearing back in September where we need real-time action on it. So they've been able to move the needle forward. I think we have some of the strong organizations at the state level, the Michigan Corn Growers, Michigan Farm Bureau. These groups have really come up to the plate. Their individual growers and farmers have come and been in Lansing and been in Washington D.C. been making sure that their legislative representatives are listening to them and contact.
We are in the midst of summertime, and that generally is a slower time in Lansing, or it has been over the past several years. This year, budget negotiations continue, and in our second half of the show, we're going to talk about that. But there's also some legislative work going on. You have introduced a plan, and I find this fascinating because I want
kind of relates to roads.
It does kind of relate to roads, but I find it fascinating. A, because I know we produce a lot of sugar beets, but B, I'd never thought of it in this vein. So what you have suggested is a pilot program, if I'm not mistaken, of about 3 years, to use sugar beet byproducts to help keep icing off the roads. How in the world is that going to work?
Well, actually, it's already been proven, and this goes back to when back at the farm, there's sometimes you put these solutions to add ballast to your tractor tires. So, and this is really getting the weeds, but one of the product has been beet juice you add into that ballast of the tractor tire rims and that component so don't rust that out versus the salt solutions. So with that there, I've seen that firsthand at the farm application. And then there's other states that have been implementing this product because it has a anti-freezing component. And so basically we will be treating the salt with this beet juice component, it has the anti-icing component. And one will create a little more adhesive nature, plus you can limit the application of the salt. And something that's been really important in Ottawa County, this was probably going back to 10 years ago with a lot of specialty crop producers of blueberries. We were losing a lot of blueberry production yields along some of the major thoroughfares because of the high salinity level, and so there was even water testing showing that there. So this is especially for those environmental sensitive areas. When you drive down like 31 in Holland, you see the environmental sensitive areas. With this way we can still make sure we have a safe driving environment and still protect the environment and making sure that we're not raising those salt levels up.
Well, you say that it adds an adhesive quality. It sounds like it would be sticky.
A little tack to it, yes.
But this is already they're doing this in Frankenmuth.
That Frankenmuth and Minnesota too. So and also another plus of it, it helps to preserve some of the infrastructure. So think of some of our bridge apparatuses. How about the S-curve here in the Grand Rapids area? That was rebuilt about 10 years ago. If the less corrosive de-icing material that could be applied on that $100 million plus infrastructure, we could expand that lifespan. So we were talking about roads and those issues. I think this does not, it's not in its own individual silo, but these are some of the, talk about best methods that we can, or best practices moving forward. I think it all comes into the whole road discussion. And are there certain solutions and things that we can do? And we all know what salt does to our cars. Could you imagine what's happening to our billion-dollar road infrastructure throughout the state of Michigan?
We are going to talk about roads here in a little bit, but this brings up an interesting question to me. How do you, as a farmer and as a state senator, help the agriculture industry to diversify by doing things just like this? Yeah. Because we know with the current trade situation that some farmers' commodities are being hurt, tariffs are hurting others. So how do you, as both an agronomist and a lawmaker, how do you help farmers in the state with what you rightfully point out is a very big industry here, diversify and find these additional uses to make their profit more sustainable at home?
Well, I think we need to create an environment in the state, at the state level, making sure there's removing any restrictions and roadblocks that could prevent companies from locating and doing the research. So one, we're pretty blessed. We have a great research university, Michigan State University. They work hand in hand with some of the stakeholder groups. We also, I think we have really created over the last decade, a better environment for business to locate here. And also, I think just using best practices, and we have like the MEAP certification process. That was legislation that's using best practices, environmental best practices, to giving some certainty to the agriculture community. We have right to farm laws here too. So I think we've laid a solid foundation at the state level, saying the state of Michigan is open to agriculture, and the state of Michigan is open to ag processing.
We've just got a few seconds left, but before we leave, we talked about the problem for farmers this year. We talked about how broad that is, and it goes well beyond Michigan. As somebody, and this is really kind of uncharted territory, as you pointed out, but how long will we feel the effects of this? Because this isn't just going to be for this year.
I say for sure 12 months, 18 months. Because as the feed prices go up, the dairy industry, the hog industry, I mentioned the turkey industry, all those other areas, those input costs goes higher. Then how about the planting schedules for next year? Do we have to put additional acres for corn to offset what we lost in those acres? A lot about the hay. I mean, it's been hard to get that hay harvested. The protein value in that hay is not there, so thus the hay is being fed to those dairy cattle aren't going to produce as much milk, which probably might be actually a plus for the industry because we have a surplus on the milk there. But for the individual producer, of course, they need high production to make those payments on it. So it has many different trails of legacy on this unique situation we haven't seen for decades.
Senator Roger Victory is my guest this morning. We're going to talk about all those other things that they expect us to talk about. We're going to talk about the budget, we're going to talk about roads, and we're going to talk about auto no fault, even though that one's already been signed. And we'll do all of that when we come back to the point. Welcome back to the point this morning. My guest is Senator Roger Victory. And Senator, I want to talk a little bit about kind of the business of the day. Talk to me about your committee assignments, because if I'm not mistaken, you are doing double duty on some of these, both policy and appropriations side. And if my quick notes that I took down this morning, they include agriculture, which we talked about in the first segment, but significantly transportation.
Yes.
And transportation comes down to roads, and that is a big subject. So you're on both sides of that.
It's been the theme lately in Lansing, yes. So on that side, I serve, actually it's unique because I serve on the appropriation side, vice chairing that side, but also have a seat at the table on the policy side. So the only senator that has dual roles on the policy and the finance end of it.
The question then comes to everybody that's listening this morning, and they want to know, where are we on the budget process? So kind of walk me through what you and your colleagues did back in June when you were passing budgets, because the budget process has been going on. We know that back in March, the governor put her priorities out, but the legislature has passed a number of budgets, but the process is not over.
Correct. I've been involved, previously served as a state representative, been on the appropriations process there for a number of years, and so the transition to the Senate was fairly easy. A component very familiar with it, and basically have done how we've done it in the past, is making sure that we, using the dollars we had available, putting a sustainable budget to finance all the operations of the state of Michigan. However, when we were doing this here, we did not look at the road issue with trying to incorporate or trying to wedge it in. There's kind of, you could probably fabricate some processes in there, but we have a budget here that we could operate our state of Michigan, finance the schools, operate all the various departments. But then what we decided to do is take a good solid approach, do a deep dive on the road issue. so that way we're not rushing ourselves or trying to just fabricate something out. And so that's been the process that we've been doing of late. Been in Lansing practically every week here, some long meetings and discussions, and so we're still working this process through and looking for a solid solution that's actually sustainable into the next decade. It's not easy. There's the needs of the roads. There's a substantial amount of money that's needed for that component if you're looking at for the next decade. We have some problems too, that we rely on the gas tax component, but yet where's the future? I look at the Chevy Cruze plant down in Ohio. They're shutting that down. It's going to be replaced by a heavy truck manufacturing company that's going to produce electric vehicles there. So how, that's part of the conversation. And there's not an easy solution to how to start incorporating that, the energy use into funding roads. So that's where we've been at and having some very robust discussions.
Well, and so you point out one of the interesting problems, and that's sustainability and what that revenue source is going to be. But the problem starts before that to figure out what's the number.
Yes.
And because you got to figure out how to get there. And the governor suggested $2.5 billion, and I think everybody knows that she proposed a gas tax. And what you're talking about is if it's an electric vehicle, you're not buying gas, is that sustainable? But first of all, is that the number?
And part of the $2.5 billion of the governor was really, you'd bring it down to about $1.8 billion or give or take, because there was some other money in through there to backfill some other spending proposals. So even under the governor's proposal, it was in the high billion, pushing this under $2 billion. So that is a fundamental to the conversation, how much you can need, and also how much can we put into the system without creating a hyperinflationary factor. Because right now, as we discussed, labor's tight and any type of construction. So do we look ramping up over a slower period of time? Do we look at, what is the capacity? So that's been some of the discussions too. How much can we put in and making sure we have good return to the taxpayers of the state of Michigan and holding those dollars, getting a good return on those on pavement and construction.
So in a budget negotiation in Lansing, and I know for many people it's something that they don't think too much about. It's about a $60 billion budget, but much of that money is predetermined.
Yes.
The spending is already worked out well in advance.
Non-discretionary.
That's right, because a lot of it's federal pass-through dollars and matching dollars that goes with that. But the Senate does a budget, the House does a budget, and both chambers happen to be controlled by Republicans right now. And so now the two chambers have to come up with something that you can agree with them and they with you, and then the negotiation with the administration. So we're still at that stage where
exactly, because the House took somewhat of a different approach than what we did in the Senate, and that was a good exercise, and we're looking at some of the things that they had adopted and the process, but it was somewhat of a little different approach, and they're looking at more of something that's a gasoline, the sales and use tax, or the sales tax component, and so what we can do in there. But basically, their theme is wherever you pay at the pump goes to the roads, and right now there's a certain portion of that revenue that doesn't go to the roads but helps fund education and local government. But in order to do that, you have about $800 million, or probably just put a little sugar on it, about $1 billion, and where do you backfill those dollars at? And believe me, if you're looking to raise $1 billion, that is in Washington, D.C., they throw those billions around real quick. At Lansing level, that is a substantial amount of money.
Yeah, and as you point out, if you did take all of that tax money out, that's going to be a $800 million hit to K through 12 alone. And we know that there's that ongoing battle about funding education, and so that's going to be a non-starter for some people, no question. So
there's also some finance things that they're looking at. It's kind of a unique scenario there. I'm digging into that component too and see, but where's that put us in another 30 years from now? So there's a lot of short-term, long-term, and trying to mirror the short-term or the long-term. It's not an easy task, because it's one short-term and long-term could be moving at a lot of different speeds, and trying to merge that together without having an incident is not an easy task.
Well, and one of the problems is too that you talked about being in the State House, but you still have a limited amount of time to have experience in understanding that longer term impact and how it's going to work. So it's a little bit of a matter of getting up to speed in the era of term limits.
That's true. Welcome to term limits, and I think that's why I appreciate what the House was doing, because they have a lot of new members, and they did a good exercise of seeing what, where, how, and the numbers behind it. So Yes, I think that was appropriate role for the House to do what they did because of the nature there versus on the Senate. You had more of the members have been there for a period of time, so they have that little bit of the understanding. But yet, we're still learning from some of the, what the House has done too. So it's a win-win for both.
Let's talk a little bit about budgets and getting them done. Now, in the time that you have been serving in the House, they have been done in pretty record
Right.
order.
Under Governor Snyder, it was a hallmark of his administration.
Yeah. So they were done in June and July, pretty much wrapped up by then. Obviously, it's a different circumstance now because Democratic administration, Republican legislature. The budget needs to be in place at the very latest by October 1st. For schools, their fiscal year has already begun. So while they have an idea, perhaps, and they've been through this before, it is a little difficult. What kind of pressure is there to get the budget done sooner rather than later?
Well, there's some pressure, but that's why I think what we did in the Senate, we did pass a sustainable budget, giving indication to the schools and our local municipalities and those operations of government, saying, here we have a strong economy, we have good revenues coming in. Here's this budget. Now, the roads issue, we're going to continue to discuss that. It might have some bearance on that, but at least this is a starting point. So I would push back a little, saying there is a starting point. There's some baselines that we have adopted a budget component, and then from there the roads is its own discussion matter.
Well, and I would agree. You have adopted a budget, but there's still somebody who needs to sign that budget.
Exactly.
And,
That's
that part hasn't been.
But at least there is a frame. I would say there's a foundation there. If you don't have a foundation, then where do you move on from there? So, but work has to be done. We have to build on that foundation.
One of the things that I found very interesting early on in this administration, and when we were up at Mackinac Island, the governor signed the bill, was almost a surprise agreement on auto no-fault insurance, because there had been some political talk back and forth, and then all of a sudden it came to be. This is something that people have been working on for 30 years. So does that suggest that this governor and this legislature are capable of finding common ground on other difficult issues like the roads budget?
I think you articulate it just fantastically there. An issue that was there for 30 years could not find some resolution, and the governor, the executive office, the House, and the Senate were able to come together. And I think a lot of the push behind that was we heard from the folks back at home. It was a grassroots effort of saying, this is not sustainable. We need some reform. And I think when the pressure that we were receiving as legislators saying we need some relief. And also, I think most people realize it wasn't sustainable going forward. And in other parts of the state, you have 1/3 of the drivers not insuring their vehicles, and our costs were continuing to escalate higher and higher and higher. And so the pressure was put on by the people back at home.
So if that is transferable or translatable, so could we, and I've been around long enough to remember those nights when we go up to midnight and stop the clock in the legislature trying to get a budget done, are we going to be up against that kind of pressure, or are you guys going to be able to get together with each other and the governor and get something passed before that deadline?
I have a positive hope that we don't go to that turning the hands of clock back, just based on what we were able to do for auto no-fault reform. That was a heavy lift. That was not an easy task. So the roadmap is there for it, and if we can continue to travel that road, there's a possibility. But there's a lot of work to be done. I said the foundation's there, but a lot of construction on that foundation needs to be done.
Senator, thank you so much for being with us. We're back with more To the Point in a moment. So as the summer continues, farmers continue to struggle with plants not in the ground, and we'll see how that plays out over the next few months, perhaps next few years. In Lansing, they're struggling with putting together a budget, but as Senator Victory told us this morning, he thinks there's a foundation, and there is, after all, still quite a bit of time. We thank the Senator for being with us this morning, and I thank you for watching us. I hope you will every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock, right here on Wood TV 8 for To the Point.